Galileo K-12 is a comprehensive assessment system for students and educators from kindergarten through 12th grade. In this demonstration, we'll be exploring the technology from 3 different viewpoints: how a teacher would experience the system, how an administrator would experience it, and lastly, from the student perspective. Let's get started.
So I'm landing right now on our launch pad. From our launch pad, users have access to a number of tiles. They tend to be the areas of the system that they use most. So we often place on the teacher portal the tiles there, what their favorite tiles are. For administrators, we provide their most used tiles. I actually decided to come in initially as an administrator, so you can see what that looks like. What you're going to notice is that the very first tile is really the dashboard tile, which tends to be a teacher's go-to place. It's also an administrator's go-to place. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. I think where I'll start today is from the teacher persona, and then we'll move up to an admin persona. So to look at the teacher persona, what I'll do is just from my admin dashboard, switch over to teacher. And when I'm on the teacher dashboard, this is what this teacher would see. So, you know, if I'm in as teacher Carrie, when I log in, I'm a 3rd grade teacher. I am pointed straight to my class. And I also have all of my students in my class right here on my roster. On our dashboard, we have 2 views of our dashboard, the calendar and the reports view. What I'll mention about the calendar is that teachers can see what's been scheduled for them, and they also have the ability to build things like tests, and then they can schedule the tests that they create. And we're going to explore this in a little bit. We're going to look at the test builder. Where I think Galileo becomes really powerful is looking at the data and the reports relative to the tests that are built. What happens is when a student takes an assessment, that assessment will show in the recent events for a teacher. And they will see both benchmark assessments and formative assessments showing in their recent events. Under each assessment that a student takes, the teacher will be able to see these 3 reports: a detailed item analysis report, an intervention alert report, and a test monitoring report. So these 3 reports a teacher will get for every assessment in our system, whether it's a benchmark assessment or a formative assessment, a teacher-created assessment. I think one of the teachers' most popular reports, the one that tends to be one of their go-to reports, is this intervention alert report. This is really what we think of as the standards mastery report. So if I click on that, the intervention alert will come up. And the first thing I'll just point out is that we have a key in the upper right-hand corner that lets a teacher know how to interpret this data. So what's going to happen is, based on how the students did on the items relative to the standards on the assessment, it's going to place them in one of these categories. So we have an emerging category, a developing category, an approaching category, as well as a mastery category. I can see my assessment here. So this was our ELA 3rd grade beginning of the year assessment benchmark. And underneath, I will see the standards. So generally what folks are going to see are their state standards. So we're building the assessments to be reflective of their state standards. We also have the ability to create assessments for Common Core as well. But I can see what standards were assessed. I can see the total number of items that measured that standard. I'll be able to see the total number of students who met the standard. And then right here, I'm seeing some aggregate data. I can look at overall how my class is doing in terms of standards mastery. So again, if it's green, then my students are having this level of mastery. Orange and red are letting me know that they really haven't quite mastered it. What's nice is I am able to see quickly how my class is doing. But I also have all of my individual student information here as well. So I can see the individual students in my class, and I can look at how individual students did in terms of a particular standard and mastery. If I continue to scroll down the page, I can slide and scroll this way. And again, I can see my class data, but what's really nice is I can also see how we're doing at the site as a grade level team. So this becomes really useful for PLC meetings when grade level teams want to get together and just say, okay, how are we overall doing in terms of our focus standards, our essential standards as a grade level team, whereas a team where we might want to focus our energies. So it really helps facilitate those type of discussions. So I've got that site level aggregate data here as a teacher, and I can also see that same information for the district too. So how are we doing overall, not just in my class, at the site, but how are we doing overall at the district? One of the reasons why this particular standards mastery report is so powerful is I'm able to notice that there are check marks by the standards. I'm going to be able to say, okay, maybe I've got some students haven't really mastered this standard. I do need to continue to work with these students. I'm going to be able to check that standard and then scroll down and click on this assignments button, which will provide suggested assignments to help in terms of reteaching and intervention of these students. And then I also have a quiz builder. So if a district, a teacher has intervention tools already that they want to employ and utilize with the students, they can simply use Galileo in a way to formatively assess whether the reteach and the intervention was successful. If I kind of come back to the screen up here, I just want to point out that I can click the question number. And when I do that, it'll allow me as a teacher to see the items that were assessed. I've got access to great metadata here. I can see the standard. I can see the item type. It's one thing about our system is that we do provide lots of different types of items. You can see things like multi-part items, multiple choice items, drag and click items, so lots of different types. You'll be able to see the DOK level, how many points the item was worth. And this is our research data right here. You'll be able to see the item parameters. In particular, you'll be able to see the discrimination value for each item. How well does this particular item discriminate between high performing and low performing students? You'll be able to see the item difficulty, how hard is this test question, and then a guessing parameter if it's applicable. And then for our benchmark items, you will also find the readability index as well as the Lexile measure. So as a teacher, I can go down and look at each of these test questions. Another thing about this report is I'm able to switch from mastery categories just to look at point earned. So if as a teacher, I'm not focused so much in on the mastery categories, I just want to know what they got right, what they got wrong, how many points earned per standard. I can just use this radio button to kind of flip the switch. I still am seeing the color coding of my mastery categories, but then I'm able to look more at points earned out of points possible. So that's one of our key standards mastery reports. I'm going to go and follow my breadcrumb right now back to my dashboard as a teacher. And like I mentioned, you're going to see that particular report right under here, under every single test, and a teacher has immediate access to that data. Another really powerful report we have on the teacher dashboard is our benchmark performance level report. So our benchmark performance level report, what this is going to do is when students take a benchmark assessment, we are going to translate the raw score into a scaled score. In our system, we call that a developmental level score. That's essentially an ability score. And we will place, based on the scaled score that a student earned, we are going to place that student in a performance band. These performance bands generally reflect the performance bands of the state test. For instance, in my example here, I have a band of minimally proficient. Any student who had a scaled score between a 590 and a 735 would be minimally proficient. I have a band of partially proficient. Any student who places between a 736 and a 772 is partially proficient. Proficient is 773 to 880, and highly proficient is 881 to 1093. I can see the total percentage of students passing, meaning those students who are in the proficient or highly proficient band. I get a pie chart that's illustrating that to me, and it also allows me to quickly see the number of students. A lot of districts will utilize this information for placement. So for instance, the students who are landing in the minimally proficient band are going to get placement maybe in an intervention. Maybe they're going to be placed in particular classes that's really going to focus on trying to increase their progress and growth. I can, as a teacher, click in and get more information. And when I click in, my view changes to look more like a bar graph, but I can see, again, the number of students in each. I can change from my chart view to a data view. When I go to my data view, you can see that there's lots of different ways I can interact with this page. It's letting me know for the test, the total points the test was worth. And then I can see the cut scores for each of the performance levels. And I can see for individual students, raw score data, points earned out of points possible, the percentage correct, but then I can see their scaled score, again, what we call at ATI, Galileo, the DL score or developmental level score, and I can see their performance level. What's great about this column here is I can sort. So again, if we're talking about placement, with a quick sort here, I can find all of my students who are minimally proficient, identify who those students are, and then utilize this information for placement purposes. And then we always want teachers to be able to act upon this data, so they can click on Standards tab here. And when they do that, they're gonna, again, see individual students, the assessment. They can see the percentage of standards mastered on the assessment. And then they're going to see each standard, and they're going to see those mastery categories. I had pointed out those mastery categories in that report, the intervention alert report. That same data is being brought in to this report over here. So a teacher can quickly zero in maybe on a focus standard, and then sort to see which students really need to focus in and need some intervention and reteaching possibly on a particular standard. Again, if I scroll down, I'm able to see percentage by standard for my class, percentages of mastery for a standard at my school site, for my grade level team, and then also at the district level as well. Another really powerful feature of this particular report is that I can select more than one assessment, which becomes a wonderful way to look at progress. So I can look at, for instance, a beginning of the year and a middle of the year assessment side by side. Again, here's my passing line, but I can see that I've had movement of students into higher bands, right? So at the beginning of the year, I had 42% who are minimally proficient, 9.5% partially proficient, 42% proficient, and just 4% highly proficient. And then by the middle of the year, we've definitely made some gains, and I can see that movement here. So this becomes a really powerful way to look at growth for our students and progress. Now, ATI's research-based assessments are also going to allow us to, are also going to allow us to forecast student performance on the state test. This is one of the great things about the assessments. And to communicate that to educators, we have our risk level report. So the way that the risk level report works is that a student will take an assessment, and when they take their very first assessment of the year, a teacher will see that they will place in either the on-course category or the moderate risk category. The low and the high won't populate right at the beginning of the year. The reason for that is the student's only taken one assessment, and so we don't have lots of data to start to discriminate high levels of risk yet. But as more and more benchmarks are provided throughout the year, more risk levels are introduced, giving us an idea of how at risk students are going to be for not passing the state test when they take it. What's great about this particular report is it becomes a vehicle for which I can group students, place students in specialized interventions. So I can see, for instance, that I have 6 students who are at high risk for not passing the state test when they take it. I can simply click on that bar. It's going to bring up a report that we have, the Instruction Performance Tracker. It reminds me that I'm looking at my high-risk kids right now, and I have 6 of them. If I click on the number 6, it's actually going to pop up for me who these students are, so I know who they are. And then I'm going to be able to see that these were 2 standards that placed my students in the moderate risk category. Essentially, had my students showed mastery of these standards, they would have placed in moderate risk. If my students had mastered this standard and this standard, as well as this one, they would have placed in low risk. And if they had mastered all of these, they would have been on course. I can see the average percent of total points earned, but this is again right here where our research is coming in. Based on our IRT analysis, we're able to indicate the likelihood that a student, or the probability that a student could master items related to the standard right now if they took the state test. We can identify these standards and then provide a path forward for assignments to assist in interventions, reteaching, differentiation of instruction, or again, if teachers have their own intervention tool or system in place, they can simply create and generate a formative assessment to assist in that. I can go back to my dashboard just following my breadcrumb. And that takes me back to my dashboard. So we have our intervention alert report that shows standards mastery. We have our benchmark performance level report, which tends to be often used for placement purposes. I just illustrated for you the risk level report. This is what's going to help forecast students in terms of how we think they're going to do on the state test. And then we have our growth report down here. The way that the growth report works, it's a scatter plot. I select my first assessment and my second assessment. So if a district was giving 3 benchmarks, they'd be able to pull up their beginning of the year, then their middle of the year and see growth. If they're giving 3, they can pull up the beginning, middle, and end. Ultimately, what we tend to see is that we really want to see growth from the beginning to the end of the year. Overall, there'll be a growth categorization for the class. Here I see expected growth maintained. What that means, there's 3 possible categorizations one might see. One is expected growth not maintained, one is expected growth maintained, and one is expected growth exceeded. If I look here, this lets me know it's a research-based growth standard, and that average growth for my class was 72. If I scroll down, I can see a little bit of the context here. I can see that the proficiency cut score was 810. This right here is my proficiency cut score. So any students who are represented by the blue dots, any student who was above that proficiency cut score, quote unquote, passed the assessment. This cut score is the same cut score that you would see over here. So you will see that the cut score here for proficient was 810. So these students who are above that green line were my students who are in the proficient or the highly proficient category. Any students who are below the green line, those students did not, quote unquote, pass the benchmark assessment. But what we really want to focus in on with this report, so we've seen this idea of achievement in the other reports, but what this report wants to focus in on is growth. And so what you'll see is that we have a red line here indicating growth. And expected growth for 3rd grade ELA was 45 points. By that, what we mean is a 45-point gain in their scaled score from the beginning of the year assessment to the end of the year assessment. Any students, regardless of whether they quote unquote pass the test or not, will be placed on this axis, and any students here to the right of the line had expected growth. Any student who was below the red line did not have expected growth. So then what we can do is start to interpret this data based on achievement and growth. So for instance, all of these students here in this quadrant, these are my students who are high achieving and had high growth. Students over here in this quadrant, these are my students, I have 4 of them, that were low growth but high achieving. These students here, these are my low growth, low achieving students, and these are my students who are low achieving, so they didn't pass the test, but they had great gains in terms of growth. This, I think, becomes a really important conversation to have with parents, with students, and as educators. It also becomes a great way for educators to start to speak about student performance. So not just whether they are quote unquote passing benchmark assessments, but are they growing in the way that we want them to grow? This report also does allow for the creation of intervention groups based on a growth. So all of this data that teachers have access to, administrators also have access to at a higher level. They're able to aggregate this at various levels. So what I'm doing right now is I'm switching to an admin view. Now, a principal or a site leader, they would see just the data at their site. So for instance, right now I'm pointed to an elementary school and I'm just seeing the data relative to my elementary school. A district level user is going to be able to come in here and see all of their schools across the district and their data aggregated. Now, some of this data is very similar to what teachers see. So I'll start down here with the benchmark performance level report. This was the pie chart that a teacher saw. And if you recall, the teacher could drill into that pie chart and then see the bar graphs. So as a district level user, I'm able to see the performance level, that placement data for my entire district. So I can see the percentage of my district population in this case, this is first grade, my middle of the year assessment, where they're placing in each of those bands. And then I can see how my first elementary school is doing in terms of placement. And I can see my second elementary school. The cut score data and detailed data is here, but I can also, as an administrator, drill in further and start to aggregate in lots of different ways. I can, again, right now I'm just seeing my middle of the year, but if I want to really get a sense of progress, I can select all 3 assessments and I can look at them side by side. So I've got my beginning of the year and how each of my sites did, my middle of the year, and my end of the year. I also can change my view to focus a little bit less on test and more on school if I want to see progress made this way. Right, so I can see, for instance, this school site here had a lot of movement from the first assessment to the mid-year and even the end of the year. We made good progress. At the district level, I'm going to be able to look at this school-wise, district-wise, class-wise, and I can even go all the way down to the student level. Again, a lot of times districts are going to zero in on the students who are in this red band here for placement purposes. Maybe they need to be brought in for intervention or to have special resources utilized. The risk level report is right over here. This is, again, the forecasting report. What I'm going to be able to do as an administrator is take a look at overall, how are we doing in terms of risk for not passing that state test? Are we where we need to be? I can see all of my grade levels and subject areas. So I can see math, ELA, I can see science, and see where I might be concerned and where we seem to be making good progress. I can click into any of these bars just like a teacher could and see those students, and I can be actually scheduling things across my district or across my site. A lot of times what we'll see is at the school level, maybe an instructional coach or a resource teacher might be using this tool to administer assignments or follow-up assessments for students. The growth scatter plot that a teacher saw is also available to administrators. here as well. So I can run this for each grade and each subject between the beginning and middle of the year test or the beginning and end of year. My students will plot accordingly into each of my quadrants, my growth quadrants. And again, I see the proficiency cut score, what expected growth was, and I can see my individual students. Now, since we are getting growth data for many grade levels and lots of different subject areas, one of the things that we've provided administrators is access to this categorical growth summary. So this is looking at the growth data across the district. And then for each grade level, I can see overall how we're doing. So I can see, for instance, in first grade, really we have exceeded growth for math. And we have exceeded growth for ELA. And this particular district didn't give a science assessment in first grade, but I can scroll down and see for all of my grade levels where we are in terms of growth. So those right there are our two main dashboard pages. We have a teacher dashboard and an administrative dashboard. Those dashboards are going to provide lots of data relative to standards mastery, how to place students for intervention purposes. It forecasts performance on the state test, and it provides a great growth analysis. How do we get all of this information? Well, we get this information off of the assessments that are created. And so that's what I want to transition to right now, is to show how a teacher can create an assessment. So teachers have access to a tool called Test Builder, and in Test Builder, they're going to be able to build classroom assessments. At ATI, we build the benchmark district-wide assessments, and then teachers can utilize a separate formative item bank to build assessments for classroom use. So for a teacher, I'm now back in that teacher persona. I'm on my teacher dashboard. A teacher just simply needs to move to their calendar view, go to build, and they will build a test. When they do that, they just need to save it in their library. Think of that as a filing cabinet. What's really powerful about our system is that teachers can build their own assessments, place them in their own libraries or filing cabinets, but the system allows for sharing too. So teachers can come together and create common formatives and share them across their sites or even across the district and utilize those with students. Creating an assessment is really easy. I just click on Create New Test. I title my test, select my grade, my subject area. I'll go math. And then I click on Save. In Test Builder, I can search for items or I can create my own items. I think what teachers tend to use the most is they do a search of our items, and they can do that by standard. So if I'm teaching 8th grade math, I can select my set of state standards. All of the concepts and the learning standards in that set of standards will appear. And as a teacher, I can scroll down and look at, like, okay, I'm teaching geometry right now. And I can select the standards that I'd like to search. And then click on search. When I'm searching for items, it lets me know how many it's returned. I can filter by item type. So we have lots of different item types in our system. We have customized technology, enhanced items that we have built. We have multi-part. We have multiple choice with more than one right answer. selectable text. We have sequencing where students click and drag. We have short answer. We have some drop-down items with lots of different item types. You can also, so you can filter by item type. You can also filter by depth of knowledge as well. When teachers see the results, they're able to just scroll down and look at the different items. If they find an item that they'd like to add to the assessment, they just click on this little plus sign and it gets added to the assessment over here. And I can continue to scroll and add items. If I want to do another search, I can do that. Just clear this and back at selecting my standards and doing my searches and adding on items from here. Once I have the items that I want, if I choose to, I can also build items. So if I have a particular item that I'd like to build, I can do that. We allow teachers to easily build all of these type of items, multiple choice and classifying. They can build drop-down items, open response items, or selectable text. There's also sequencing and short answer. When a teacher creates an item, they add the points, they add the DOK. Most importantly, they can also quickly and easily add a standard, because our system is standards based, right? We want them looking at reports in terms of standards mastery. They can add stimulus materials. Here I can decide that I want this to be a multiple choice test question with more than one right answer. We have a rich text box to allow them to enter in the STEM. What's nice about this is they can add not just text, but they can bring in hyperlinks. Images are really easily brought in, as are video and audio files. So items can become really interactive. So a teacher would just type in the STEM, answer choices, and then select what the right answers were. Once I've built my item, I'll just save it to the test. As a teacher is previewing an assessment or building an assessment, they can preview it from a teacher perspective. This will almost look like a printout for them. Again, I can see the items and things like the standard and other types of metadata. I can also, while I'm building a test, preview it at any time as a student, so I can see what it would look like from a student perspective. Once a test is completed and I'm happy with that assessment, all I need to do is publish it. And when I publish my assessment, I'm ready to schedule it for students to take online, or I can click and get a printed copy. What I'd like to show you next is what this assessment experience ends up looking like from the student perspective, what that student interface looks like. So I'm just going to close out some of these pop-up windows that I've created. Right now I'm going to sign out as a teacher. And I'm going to log in as a student. For a student to log in, all they do is type in their login name and password provided to them by their teacher. and they're brought into our Student Parent Center. In terms of the Student Parent Center, students take tests here. Teachers, remember I pointed out that they can schedule assignments for intervention purposes. Students would take those assignments clicking on the green tile. We also do have test results. So a lot of districts will provide access to the Student Parent Center to families so they can be logging in and looking at assessment results. Notice that we do have Google Translate, so this allows the center to be quite accessible for families and for parents whose primary language may not be English. If what I'm doing right now as a student is taking a test, I simply click on the Take Test tile. I will see the test that has been scheduled. And I've put together a sample test this particular sample test has lots of different subject areas and grade level items represented. Before I jump in and spotlight some of those items, I just want to point out a few things about the center. One is that it is possible to, when you schedule an assessment, schedule different tools for students. So for instance, we do have a calculator that is available. We have a basic, a scientific, and a graphing calculator that can be scheduled and accessed in the testing interface. We also provide access to a dictionary and thesaurus if the teacher would like to provide access to that while students are testing. And then students also have access to these student tools. They may take notes and add notes while they're working through the assessment. They can utilize a strike-through functionality. They can mark an item for review. If they mark an item for review and they flag it, they will be notified of this at the end of the test, so they know to come back to this particular item. And we also have a highlighting feature, which allows the students to highlight not just stories and readings, but they can also highlight things in the questions. What I want to do now is just spotlight some item types. This particular item type, I will play it really quick. This is from our Kinder assessment.
Look at the flowers. Click on the flower that is shortest.
The student responds, and then they don't have to, there's no save that they have to remember to click. All they have to do is click on the green arrow and it will move them to another question. So these are what we call our teal and our team items. They're intended to, these assessments are provided to kinder and first grade students. Students were provided earbuds and headphones to interact with them. Another item type that I'll spotlight here, this is actually a multi-part item. So you see a lot of these on state tests, and we have incorporated these item types into both our benchmark and our formative item banks. We do have standard multiple choice items in here. See another item type that you'll see a lot are dropdowns, where the student reads the item and then they're asked to complete the item, and then again they just move on. Here's a example of more of a performance-based written open response item type that teachers often provide students. Question 45, here we're asking the student to actually interact directly with text. 46 is an example of a multiple choice test question with more than one right answer. Again, you're seeing a lot of these item types on state tests. And I think there was one more I just wanted to show. This is, again, like interactive text. Lots of different item types that we have available. Once students finish the assessment, they are brought to a review page. Again, they'll be able to see which items they've answered, and then these exclamation marks indicate items not answered. And I can also see which items I flagged. Any of these items, they are all of these items are hyperlinked, so I can click back at any point in time and return to an item as needed. When I'm done with the assessment as a student, if I know I'm done and I don't need to get back in, I just submit my test and it exits me. If I'm going to be taking this assessment partly today, partly tomorrow, I can exit, and as long as the testing window is open, I am able to return to the test and finish the test. So I think that is everything at this point that I wanted to spotlight and highlight.